What's up, YouTube fam? Welcome back to the channel. As you can see, we're up $727 on the day right now, which is great. But I really want to take this time to talk about the psychology and talk about the plays that we're in, the plays that we took some losses on, and basically what we can learn from them. So let's go to the history. So basically, yesterday I finally decided I had had enough and closed the RGTI position. Now, when you look at it, it's really just disastrous, right? I sold the contracts for 95 cents, bought them back for $9.50. So basically, it 10x'd, right? I literally 10x'd the wrong way. And that's just what happened. Obviously, if you would have bought puts the exact moment I sold puts, you would have made 1,000%. So let's just pull up the chart because I want to discuss what happened and why I closed the trade. So ultimately, the strike price in terms of the price action before the dump, it really wasn't the worst strike. Like, I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, the technical analysis was off. Obviously, on a stock like this that's this speculative, technical analysis basically doesn't even exist. And that's a very important lesson I learned for my option selling journey was like, collecting these crumbs, right, of 95 cents, so $380. Yes, it could work in the sense of you can win, majority of your trades, but ultimately when something like this happens, yes, it will wipe you out. Now, with that being said, there's been tons of great suggestions in the comments. People have said to close it at 3 to 4x the premium, right? So if you're down, so obviously in this case, since I was supposed to collect $380, I should have closed this position at 1,200, 1,400 as opposed to 3,700. That definitely would have saved me a lot of money. Other things to consider are just simply, staying away from these types of stocks. Obviously, the premiums do get good, and it's very easy to get blinded by them. But with that being said, is it really worth it, right? Like, you're really just trading crumbs for ultimately someone to steal bread, right? Like, it's like, imagine I gave you a loaf of bread, and now I said, hey, man, I can give you a couple more crumbs, but in exchange for those crumbs, if you lose, I get to take your entire loaf, right? You probably would say no, right? You probably would say, why would I risk my entire loaf of bread for a couple crumbs? So that's kind of what it's like selling options on a stock like this, right? Because selling options is a strategy that 100% works, but it really just depends on what you're trading. So with that being said, the psychology behind it, right? The stress of just holding this position, it just was getting to me, right? Like, I think it was just mentally affecting me. So I decided to close it. Now, I feel like everyone in their trading journey goes through this where you close a position and of course it just so happens to be the bottom. And obviously, I sold, or better yet, bought back my options at 950. I think right now they're worth 750. So yes, I could have saved myself $800 or so had I waited till today. But let's be real, right? If I was still in the position, I probably wouldn't be closing today either. So at this point, I think I'd be up 400 and something on the day with this position. But again, I just don't think the stress was worth it. I didn't want to carry the burden of this position anymore. And I guess I want you guys to take away the fact that, like, despite everything I went through, right, I felt such a sense of peace when I closed this position. And I'm sure if you're more of an advanced trader, you know what I'm talking about. When something's going against you and you're in it, it really does affect you mentally, and all you do is want it to recover. But once you finally do close it, even if it is for a massive loss like I just took, you feel this overwhelming sense of peace, and now you can move on with your life. And ultimately, I think the number one thing is just not letting it get to this point, right? Like, obviously, when it was down here, I think the 3 to 5x rule is a good rule if you're going to be selling options on such speculative stocks. Now, someone also did point out that they can tell based on how I trade that I have trouble cutting losses. And I'll say, like, I think throughout my whole trading career, that has been, part of my journey is a little bit of a struggle with cutting losses. Like, some of my best moments in the markets have been round tripping, whether it was cryptos or stocks, holding it and letting it recover. And I'll admit, yes, I do have an issue cutting losses. And that's kind of what brought me to selling options in the first place, right? Was the fact that I can sell puts until I get assigned, then sell calls. Never really need to worry about cutting a loss. Now, the moment you decide to sell puts on a stock like this, that all goes out the window, right? Even ConL with its volatility, it's still mimicking Coinbase, which is a stock that I can really sleep at night trusting in the sense of, like, I've been balls deep into crypto for 3 or 4 years now. Coinbase is not something that's going to make me lose sleep at night, which is why I did decide to double down and buy some shares today. I had some things I was looking for on the Bitcoin chart that I saw. Obviously, with only a couple thousand in the account, it wouldn't be enough to really sell options on anything I would have wanted to sell options. So I decided to take a stab at buying some shares, which is the first time I'm doing that on this channel with this challenge. But just with everything I've been through with selling options over the last 2 months, it definitely made me realize, getting assigned and ultimately sometimes buying shares is going to be more profitable than selling puts at times, right? I think that there's a time for everything. There's a time for strangles, straddles, condors. Now, ultimately, I'm not saying you should be doing all of it, right? By no means am I saying that. Matter of fact, I'd say quite the opposite. I think majority of people should be sticking to 1 to 2 strategies and keeping it very simple. So for me, selling puts, doing the wheel strategy, and ultimately sometimes buying shares, maybe even buying leap options. To me, that's as simple as it gets, right? Because selling puts, for someone who doesn't understand it, it can be very complicated. But if you're on this channel, you probably do understand it. And you understand it's a pretty simple strategy that works really well as long as it's on the right asset. And ultimately, the wheel strategy, the same thing. Now, obviously, buying shares, that's basically as basic as it can get in the markets as well. So, Connell, sometimes I think you're better off double downing on a position as opposed to getting involved in other stocks you don't really know. I think that was the fire I was playing with on this channel, was like, I would win a trade and then ultimately move to a new trade that had news, volatility, something that was going to make it interesting, right? But the problem is you're sacrificing the knowledge you have in the company to just get a high premium in a company you have no idea anything about. You're almost better off just double downing, right? Like even with the whole MSTX saga, it was like the moment I was able to get out for a small gain, I did. But at the same time, I would have been better off just sticking with MSTX and taking more plays on MSTX than jumping into RGTI, right? So there's a lot to consider in the markets, right? It's a very infinite world. There's a lot going on, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed with information. And I think the best thing you can do is simplify it, right? Like anyone can make something sound complex, but the real geniuses are the ones who make complex things sound simple. So obviously, yes, long term, my plan still is to get into the TQQQs and ultimately do the wheel strategy on that. But I saw an opportunity to go long on Connell that I really like. Maybe in the moment it doesn't look incredible, but Bitcoin still looks great, and I still trust that obviously Connell will find its way following. Obviously, Bitcoin, this is exactly what I called out on the Discord actually. So let's see if we go to, wrong Discord. But if we go to the charts, right, you'll see that, or where did I put it? In the general, I said that I was looking for Bitcoin to break above the zone, come back and hold. And that's literally exactly what it's doing. So that was what triggered me to add some shares to the Connell position. Ultimately, obviously, it's extremely volatile, so these short-term pivots are not going to scare me. Truthfully, something like a Connell chart, the only thing that's worth looking at is making sure it's still mimicking Coinbase, because obviously, if you were part of the MSTX saga, then obviously the moment that it didn't mimic MSTR was when all the panic arose. But ultimately, something like the Connell chart in general, it's not really as useful. Like, yes, you can try to predict tops and bottoms, but I think you're going to get more value looking at the Bitcoin chart and obviously the NASDAQ, because that's what's going to make it move. That's the thing about crypto stocks, right? Is crypto stocks tend to follow both the NASDAQ and Bitcoin, where obviously if you're just trading crypto in general, it's more of just correlated to Bitcoin. Now, with that being said, Bitcoin will have a hard time going up if the NASDAQ is falling. But something like this is what I like to see. I like to see how Bitcoin is holding, right? It's even bull flagging above a demand zone while the NASDAQ is struggling. So, the NASDAQ, is always going to get its footing and come back up. And when you see Bitcoin holding while the NASDAQ struggling, to me, that's a great setup for crypto, regardless of what Connell looks like in the moment or any other stock. Like, I still like the setup. The short-term volatility doesn't bother me. It doesn't faze me. But ultimately, I think that's the number one takeaway I want you guys to get from this video, is when you're in a position and you messed up, right? Because sometimes you might take a position due to, I'm trying to think of the right word, right? Like maybe it's a dopamine rush, which obviously you want to avoid. Maybe it's just impulse, right? That's what I want to think of. Sometimes you might take a position due to impulsive thoughts, right? You saw something that you wanted, and then after thinking about it, you realize you made a mistake. Ultimately, you will get more peace when you exit it, even if it's for a loss, than trying to hold on, right? On the flip side, this position I'm currently in that's down $97, 90, whatever, I don't really feel that way, right? So let's just say you're in a position that's winning, but you realize you took it impulsively and you made a mistake, then you probably want to exit. But on the flip side, if you're in a position that's losing and you still feel confident about it, don't start panicking because the P&L isn't going in your favor. So, Con-L right now, it's just following the fact that the Nasdaq's struggling. Ultimately, like I said, I think that's what makes crypto stocks very tricky, is that, it has to follow both the Nasdaq and Bitcoin. Ultimately, though, I do think that as long as Bitcoin can continue to hold, once the Nasdaq recovers, we will see a great bounce from Con-L. That was like my thesis with this position. If it doesn't play out, it doesn't play out. At the moment, I don't have any intentions of cutting it, winning or losing. Like I said, I've wanted to collect more shares on Con-L. I figured with a couple grand in the account, it was a good time to do so. Maybe I'll be right, maybe I'll be wrong. But regardless, I do think that with a new option seller, the best strategy is still going to be running the wheel on TQQQ. I hope you guys were able to gain some psychology tips. Hope you were able to learn a little bit of insight from this video. Make sure to comment your thoughts. Make sure to like this video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next one.